Just prior to finding the historical identity of the Queen of Sheba, I had been reading Against Apion by Josephus, when he became noticeably disturbed by something Manetho had said. He goes on to relate that shepherds and rulers from other countries, the Hyksos, had taken over the Nile Delta for 400 years and were Semitic in origin. Of course, I immediately looked up the pharaohs, because any expulsion like that would be noted in its history. So, of course, I found Ahmose I immediately, in his fight against the Hyksos and their expulsion. Some years later, having not really researched it too much and revisiting it, it did appear that there was 100 to 200 years of Semitic rule of Lower Egypt, and then about 100 to 200 years of Semitic Hyksos rule. This is proven by the Turin Canon, and the Semitic Canaanite names of the kings and pharaohs, like Jacob-Har, for example, and many others. If followed up further, one could probably find Joseph, if such was a true story, at least in parts from Genesis, and I don't see why not. There seems to be a difference with the Hyksos, though, who came years later, as the contention between Upper and Lower Egypt in the latter 200 years increased. From 1950 to 1550 BCE, estimated altogether 1750 to 1550 BCE Hyksos rule. At its inception, based on what is known biblically about this topic, a famine catastrophe is likely the cause of a large non-native group living in a foreign country. Whether or not that is true or false is non-consequential to my translation. Somewhere, the Semitic peoples rose to power, and it was not fought against. They had been there for a long time. An oddity to note is that the Hyksos were said to dress up in the pharaonic regalia of the native Egyptians, perhaps to finalize the legitimacy of their rule. Apophis, the 15th dynasty Hyksos, was called chieftain of the retinue by Kamose, last 17th dynasty pharaoh of Upper Egypt. Retinue implies Canaanite origin. Kamudi last attested Hyksos pharaoh, 1534 to 1541 BCE, 2 scarab seals found in Jericho with his name and named in the Turin Canon, column 10, line 28, Gardner entry 1020. In the late 17th dynasty, just before Kamose, was Sequenre. They may have reevaluated his name by now, as there was a question to it. He went to battle against the Hyksos and died a gruesome death. His mummy was full of axe wounds and hurriedly half embalmed because he had sustained substantial wounds, died, and had been left for some time before being able to be retrieved. His son or brother Kamose died a few years later. From what I can gather, the Hyksos' hold on Egypt was not a certain one. The only thing they had was the fact that they were surrounded by the people. Without the people, there would be nothing stopping native Egyptian invasion and the Hyksos expulsion. That the people were slaves is without doubt. The Hyksos were using the people as a shield to stay in power. I heard no railing by native Egyptians against the Semitic peoples living in the Nile Delta, only complaints about the leadership in the Nile Delta. Advisors to Kamose in the Kamose inscription advised Kamose not to upset the status quo or advance against the Hyksos, and you can tell that by the quote, "But they aren't taking our cows." See, all are loyal as far as Kusay. We are tranquil in our part of Egypt. Elephantine at the first cataract is strong, and the middle part of the land is with us as far as Kusay. Men till for us the finest of their lands. The native Egyptians would have to pay for goods from Lower Egypt. Our cattle pasture in the papyrus marshes. Corn is sent for our swine. Our cattle are not taken away. He holds the lands of the Asiatics. We hold Egypt. Kamose responds to his advisors. I should like to know what serves this strength of mine, when a chieftain in Avarice and another in Cush, and I sit united with an Asiatic and a Nubian, each in his possession of his slice of Egypt. I cannot pass by him as far as Memphis. No man can settle down when despoiled by the taxes of the Asiatics. I will grapple with him. He means with Kamudi. I assert that the Semitic people were being held in Lower Egypt, and the native Egyptians were simultaneously being kept out. They were all being oppressed by the Hyksos. Taxes, tolls, no allowance of free travel, closed quarries. The bountifulness of the land was not being shared. The cows were being allowed to graze, being a singular benefit. Sequenre or Kamose had a young child, Ahmose, who had been cared for after his father's demise. Assuming that his father or predecessor was murdered by the Hyksos, which is highly likely, and was raised privately at risk of the vulnerability of a land without a king. At least by the age of 10, he was being prepared. His very youthful appearance in his statues is because he was very young. The Rhine mathematical papyrus refers to Ahmose, founder of the New Kingdom, as he of the south. Compare Queen of Sheba, also referred to as from the south, the utmost parts of the earth. He of the south has attacked and taken Stele, Charo, an ancient Egyptian fortress on the way of the Horus military road, the major road leading out of Egypt into Canaan, and Sharohen was the last Hyksos stronghold in the Negev desert. Manetho called him Amosis. Gardner, 1964, page 168. The ultimate achievements of Ahmose were freeing and uniting all of Egypt, opening the borders, ports, and quarries. The Hyksos pharaohs were run out of Egypt. There is not much along the line of mass migrations noted in the strata checked, but of what has been investigated, a mass migration probably did not occur altogether at that time. Likely some, maybe many, but not the whole population. I suggest this is because the people did not have to leave at all unless they wanted to, and it was more consequential that they prior could not leave at all, and it probably took many generations for them to leave ultimately, and not because they were asked to. It was a mighty rush to expel the Hyksos, and miraculous is certain. Canaanite-style artifacts dated to the Thutmose or New Kingdom period suggest that a large part of the city's Semitic population remained in residence following its reconquest by the Egyptians. Betak, Manfred, The Aftermath of the Hyksos and Avarice, Culture Contacts and the Making of Cultures, Papers in Homage to Itamar Ibn Zohar, by Rekafit Sela Shefi and Gideon Turi, Tel Aviv University. 2011, pages 19 through 65. So there's already been some very compelling coincidences. One, Ahmose, Amosis, the name Moses, the 400 years slavery, the story of the baby or small child sent to free Egypt and fully realized in Ahmose's life story. The Tempest Stele, at around this precise time, the island of Thera, modern Santorini, the volcano on Thera, erupted, being one of the most explosive eruptions in the history of the world, which did most definitely have an effect on the surrounding areas. There are questions and disagreements. There has been enough testing, it would seem, but no concise agreement between scientists and archaeologists on even an estimate of the exact date. To me, that means there should be more testing, and just find the average date. The Egyptians were very straightforward with writing their history. Their documented true events in their history by day, and most especially the extraordinary events worthy of large steles in memory. The Minoan eruption was a major catastrophic event that devastated Thera in 1650 BCE. It destroyed communities and agriculture and areas on nearby islands. It affected the coast of Crete with earthquakes and tsunamis. There has been more investigations into what the correct date of the eruption was, rather than a very obvious appearance of a well-known major player in history, or else we would be more knowledgeable cultures of this fact. I found a few good examples of articles, even from NASA in 1989 up through 2003, where you can see the evolution of scientists studying just how cataclysmic this event was. From NASA, December 1st, 1989, Thera Santorini eruption. 3 scientists at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory and a university professor have dated the most powerful volcano eruption in recorded history, the Thera Santorini eruption of the late 17th century BCE. In 1989, they described it as 2 million Hiroshima-type atomic bombs exploding. Doctors Pang, Srivastava, and Kasten, all from JPL, and Hung Sang Chao, University of California at Los Angeles. The scientists used Chinese historical accounts of the atmospheric effects brought on by the volcano's eruption and matched it with Greenland ice cores and tree ring analysis. Climactic anomaly recorded in the time of King Qi, last king of the Xia, earliest recorded Chinese dynasty. The sun was dimmed. 3 suns appeared, sundogs, which was a sign in Chinese Salvationist religions. Winter and summer came irregularly. There was frost in July, which was very unusual for the Yellow River Valley at the time. Crop failures, famine, and floods, followed by severe drought lasting 7 years into the Shang dynasty. Now that was China. Between Thera and Egypt is 700 miles. Between China and Thera is 4,000 miles. October 1995, Worldwide Impacts of the Eruption of Thera by P.E. Lamoureux, Environmental Geology 26, 172 through 181. Thera Eruption, 1628-1450 BCE, constituted natural catastrophe, unparalleled in all of observed history, with massive loss of life from ejected gases, volcanic ash, bombs, and flows. The collapse into the caldera, 15 km in diameter, caused a giant ocean wave, a tsunami, that at its source was estimated in excess of 46 m high, killed thousands of people along the shorelines in the eastern Mediterranean area. In Asia and Africa, darkness from the ash fallout, lightning and destructive earthquakes. Earthquake waves emanating from the epicenter near the ancient volcano were felt as far away as Norwegian countries. It was very damaging. Volcanic ash spread upward as a pillar of fire and clouds into the atmosphere and blocked out the sun for many days. It affected the environment of the entire world, and it, according to the time the article was written, could be observed in bristlecone pines of California, bog oaks of Ireland, England, and Germany. Biblical passage, Exodus 13, 21 through 22, pillar of fire by night and cloud by day. It's been understood that the Thera eruption was bigger than Krakatoa, Tambora, Vesuvius, Nevado del Ruiz, Pinatubo, and Mount St. Helens. Any of those eruptions. So basically by 1990, it was already understood in scientific and archaeological areas that Ahmose and the Thera Santorini eruption were inexplicably connected, the Tempest Stele of Ahmose. They have been connected, but nobody really has come out and said it. Put it all together, and this is what you have. And this is true historically, it's scientifically can be proven. For 3,000 plus years, many generations of people have believed that the Egyptians were the bad guys of the story, and really the entire time they've been falsely accused. Moses was given his fame under the guise of him being a Hebrew leader versus an Egyptian leader. It hid his identity for thousands of years, and it marked Egyptians for a very long time as oppressors when this is obviously not true. Toned down a bit later, but still cataclysmic, according to the Canadian Museum of History, History Museum CA, William Broad, New York Times, October 21, 2003, the explosion estimated to be about the equivalent of 40 atomic bombs, 100 times more powerful than the eruption at Pompeii. Huge tsunami, possibly 300 foot high, sending water 200 miles up the Nile, 90 times more powerful than Mount St. Helens. The most recent things I've read, for example, from livescience.com, that there are no first-person accounts of what happened that day, but scientists can compare it to detailed records of Krakatoa in 1983. Although there is no clear ancient records of the eruption, its plume and volcanic lightning may have been described in the Egyptian Tempest Stele and in the Chinese bamboo annals. That's not good enough, and I'm not talking about the scriptures here. The clearest picture is the one that incorporates everything. Altogether, this story is to be reckoned with. I'd say this is the most obvious truth I've seen in a while that's not addressed as a mystery that should be solved, or basically already is. Ahmose's Moses and the Exodus, directly connected to the Thera Santorini eruption, is a natural positive conclusion to come to. Regardless of the exact year that the volcano erupted, this is still the story of Moses and the Exodus. It's to be affirmed. Its likely date is 1530 BCE, because it can be realistically dated to within 30 years of its occurrence if someone's really wanted to work. The Tempest Stele of Ahmose. The stele consists of a single text in horizontal lines on both sides of a calcite block that once stood over 1.8 meters tall. Linguist Dr. Robert Rittner and Dr. Nadine Mueller from the University of Chicago's Institute believe the unusual weather patterns described in the stele was a result of the massive explosion at Thera, modern-day Santorini, in the Mediterranean Sea, because volcanic eruptions have widespread impact on weather. The Ahmose stele says as follows. There are some breaks in translations and words missing. Long live the Horus, great of manifestations, he of the two ladies, pleasing of birth, the golden Horus who binds the two lands, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Neb-Peti-Ra, son of Ra, Ahmose, living forever. Now his majesty dwelt in the town of Sejafadaway, provisioner of the two lands, in the district just to the south of Dendera. Now then, Amun-Ra, lord of the thrones of the two lands, was in Heliopolis of Upper Egypt, Thebes. It was his majesty who went south, upstream, in order to give to him bread, beer, and everything good and pure. Now after the offering there, then attention was given this district. Now then, the cult image of this god, as his body was installed in, literally, united with, this temple, while his limbs were in joy. Now then, this great god desired, his majesty, while the gods complained of their discontent. Then the gods caused that the sky come in a tempest of rain, with darkness in the condition of the west, and the sky being in storm without cessation, and louder than the cries, literally voices of the masses, more powerful than, while the rain howled on the mountains louder than the sound of the underground source of the Nile that is in the Elephantine. Then every house, every quarter that the storm and rain reached, their corpses, floating on the water like skiffs of papyrus outside the palace audience chamber for a period of days, while no torch could be lit in the two lands. Then his majesty said, how much greater this is than the wrath of the great God, than the plans of the gods. His majesty then descended to his boat, with his council following him, while the crowds on the east and west had hidden faces, having no clothing on them, after the manifestation of the wrath of God. His majesty then reached the interior of Thebes, with gold confronting gold of this cult image, so that he received what he desired. Then his majesty began to reestablish the two lands, to give guidance or a conduit for the flooded territories. He did not fail in providing them with silver, with gold, with copper, with oil and cloth, comprising every bolt that could be desired. His majesty then made himself comfortable, seated himself within the palace, life, prosperity, health. Then his majesty was informed that the mortuary concessions had been entered, the tomb chambers collapsed, the funerary mansions undermined, and the pyramids fallen. What had been made rendered non-existent, what had not been made. Then his majesty commanded to restore the temples that had fallen into ruin in this entire land, to refurbish the monuments of the gods, to erect their enclosure walls, to provide the sacred objects in the noble chamber, to mask the secret places, to introduce into their shrines the cult images which were cast to the ground, to set up the braziers, to erect the altars, to establish their bread offerings, to double the income of the personnel, to put the land into its former state. Then it was done in accordance with all that his majesty had commanded. The Thera Santorini eruption had been termed super-colossal on a scale of 8, and it was rated at a 7, which explains the explosivity value. The largest 8 is termed mega-colossal. On a smaller scale, one can draw conclusions based on these large scientific facts, highly anomalous biblical occurrences, like the pillar of fire by day and cloud by night, the Thera eruption, and maybe even the crossing over on dry land, Thera-induced tsunami, Exodus 14:21 through 22, a result of the tsunami first pulling the water away from that area, or maybe it's just as simple as the borders were finally open and they could pass through on the dry land that separated the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Because it was previously as good as a sea, they couldn't have crossed it before. But really, the only way through for any traveler without a boat would be the narrow land between the seas. So this is a really feasible date, 1530 BCE or so, time of Ahmose I, and time for the Exodus. The Queen of Sheba, 1450 BCE, Makara Hatshepsut, Michal from the Bible. More studied would clear up many difficulties, many chronological, historical difficulties that stand in the way of modern scholarship. Moving forward, Irish history. The Lebor Gabala Erenn, formerly known as the Nuachongabala, the Book of Nuachongbail, the New Settlement. Excerpts from the Lebor Gabala Erenn, the Book of the Taking of Ireland, Part 5, edited and translated with notes, R. A. Stewart McAllister, D. Lit, Dublin, published for the Irish Text Society by the Educational Company of Ireland, Ltd., 88 Talbot Street, 1956. Also online sources. The Lebor Gabala Erenn was compiled in the 12th and 11th centuries. It is myth, history, poems, prophecy, and prose of Ireland, written in the Irish language from the creation of the world to the Middle Ages. Its initial main character's name is Scota, the eponymous ancestor of the Gaels and Scots. Its history is a bit of a mystery to Irish scholars. It's explained it's because the legend is immortal. It has been said that they do not confuse history and that it appears Ireland was visited twice in their history by the same persons, and they can't explain it aesthetically. Later writings included Scota also, the Book of Leinster, a medieval Irish manuscript from 1160 CE. Scota, it is written, was the daughter of an Egyptian pharaoh contemporary to the time of Moses. And this is where I obviously am going to interject. I believe that was Makara Hatshepsut, the great-great-great-granddaughter of Ahmose I, the founder of the 18th dynasty, according to my translation. It is insisted that the ancestors of the Irish were part of the Bible. Scota was said to have married Goidel Glass and were the beginning point of the ancestry of the Scots and Gaels. Goidel Glass was the descendant of Gomer, son of Phineas Farsad, a Babylonian who traveled to Scythia after the collapse of the Tower of Babel. His son Newell went to Babel to study the confusion of language. His son Goidel studied languages also and was invited to Egypt to marry the Pharaoh, Cingres, Cingres, daughter Scota. It is claimed that Scota and Goidel fashioned a language called the Ogham script, made from the best 72 languages in existence. Ancient Irish history and myth, from its inception. 2300 BCE, the people of Sequenre. Before the biblical flood, it says their leader was the granddaughter or daughter of Noah. She made her own way, building an ark for her and her followers. It claims she and her followers all died, and one man survived. Obviously, I find that kind of questionable for reasons one would suspect, but if you reverse it, they survived and one man left or died, which almost seems more feasible. 2000 BCE, people of Partholon. Nemed Mintir Nemed, privileged, known for having abandoned Ireland. Firbolg, 1700 BCE, descended from Nemed, went to Greece, and then returned to Ireland, and were overthrown by Tuatha De Danann in the Battle of Magturid, 1450 BCE. It says that the Tuatha De Danann reigned for 1,000 years and were defeated by the Milesians in 500-600 BCE, which makes the corresponding dates good estimates, estimating most of the dates to within about 100 years for each, from the invasion of the Tuatha De Danann to the invasion of the Milesians. But we can see here 2000, 1400 BC, 500 BCE. 3 lines in time. Christian monks record the Tuatha De Danann as kings and queens and heroes of the distant past who had supernatural powers. Excerpt from the Celts' History, Life, and Culture, Carey, John, 2012. They also appear in tales set centuries apart, showing them to be immortal. One night on YouTube, I found an interesting sound recording of a pastor or someone having to do with some church somewhere in the US or Canada in the 60s or 70s. It was very strange, but I listened. I had a hunch at the time there was something to it. Canadian Church's online resources is the other way I found this information. It can be found on YouTube under Jeremiah, Scota, and Teatepi, What Jeremiah Planted, by Bertrand Comparat. This is what he said. Regarding the prophet Jeremiah in Jeremiah 1, verse 10, God commissioned him to carry out a double task, saying, "See, I have set thee over the nations and over the kingdoms to root out and to pull down, to destroy and throw down, and to build and to plant." His rooting out was completed when Nebuchadnezzar, 604-562 BCE, and the Babylonian army had finished the deportation of the kingdom of Judah to Babylon, the flight of the survivors to Egypt. Jeremiah accompanied them to Egypt. Where did he build and plant? Historically, the Bible does not tell us. It last mentions Tepenes in Egypt, just as Jeremiah in Jerusalem. It warns the people not to rebel against Babylon. Ezekiel was given the same warning at Babylon. The parable of the great eagle, which cropped off from the top twigs of the cedar tree an emblem of the Judah royal family and carried it to Babylon, where it became a low vine. But another eagle came along, and the vine grew toward him. Ezekiel equated the first eagle with Nebuchadnezzar and the second with Pharaoh in Egypt. He was warned not to break the covenant and to be a vassal to Babylon. Then, in contrast to what the eagles have done, God says what he will do. I will take the highest branch of the cedar and crop off the young things and the tender ones, and will plant it on a high mountain in the height of Israel, and it will bring forth boughs and bear fruit. Under it dwells birds of every kind, in the shadow of its branches. 12 Ezekiel, verse 17, 22, 23. Feminine words are used for the young twigs. Nebuchadnezzar killed all the sons of Judah, thinking this destroyed the royal family. Numbers 27, verse 8, shows under Israel law, if no sons, the inheritance went to the daughters. Numbers 36, 5 through 11. The daughters of Zelophehad, Mala, Tirzah, Hagla, Milcah, and Noah. 44th chapter of Jeremiah records that Jeremiah, with his scribe Baruch and the king's daughter, were taken with the remnant to Tahpanhes in Egypt and were warned that they had to escape. It was the only possible way God's prophecy to Jeremiah would occur. The audio recording on YouTube, the narrator says that it's a common occurrence at the time that the audio recording was made that the churches and congregations were calling Jeremiah the prophet of doom, creating a fable that Jeremiah died in Egypt, which is still the consensus, and that was the end of his story. But by stating this in churches, he went on to say, they accused their God of failure and falsehood, because in order to fulfill God's promise, he would have to leave Egypt. What did Jeremiah build and plant and where? Where did Jeremiah take the king's daughter? To a great Israeli nation, mountain height. They were not taken to Babylon, where the people of Judah were captive. It would have been recorded by Ezekiel if so. They could not have traveled through the Babylonian Empire to where the 10 tribes were, who were by this time called Scythians. They were not taken back to Judah, the record is clear, but they did stop there to pick up the Ark of the Covenant and the Stone of Destiny. They had been hidden from the Babylonians. Where else was there Israeli kingdoms at the time? Greece, Spain, and Ireland. Historians say that the Greeks were uncivilized until a civilization was brought to them by settlers, non-Egyptian aliens expelled by the Egyptians 1,000 years prior. The Danites, seafarers of the tribe of Dan, left Egypt by sea after the Exodus. Ireland was conquered by the Tuatha De Danann, and they reigned for 1,000 years. Then the migration from Egypt, 585-597 BCE. They were men and women of great ability. They traveled to other lands where they might seek their own intelligence levels. Seriously, that's what it said. Second, Miletus was a power and a colonizer. Milesian coins bore the Lion of Judah. Milesian mercenary troops were hired by Egypt, even as border guards. Sailing from Spain with a considerable fleet and army, they conquered the Tuatha De Danann and settled in Ireland. Gaelic is compared to and likened to Phoenician Semitic Hebrew, and it's believed to have contributed to or become the Gaelic language. Irish chronicles record Milesians introduced the law of Moses, and it remained in place until St. Patrick. Irish history records in 583 BC there came to Ireland from Egypt Ogham Fadla, which means the great prophet, with Baruch and the king's daughter. The tomb of Jeremiah can be found in Ireland. Nearby is a stone inscribed with hieroglyphics and a star formation that was in alignment in 583 BC. The Bible records that the Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines, but can that be trusted? Jeremiah didn't live past Egypt in the Bible. The Bible doesn't mention the Ark being captured in Babylon, although it does mention the looting of the golden vessels of the temple. The narrator contends that in taking the king's daughter on the divinely commanded mission to build and plant, Jeremiah would naturally take the remaining sacred objects, and of course no positive record in the Bible. It does state that they took Jacob's pillow, the stone of destiny, the stone under the coronation chair at Westminster Abbey. It is presumed the Egyptian daughter is a daughter of Pharaoh or the daughter of Zedekiah. There is a question whether second Scota was married to Spain of the Milesian dynasty, but it expressly states she traveled with Jeremiah and Baruch in 583 BC. Two branches of the royal tribe united, the free half of Judah, as God said to Jeremiah. Jeremiah was not a prophet of doom, only to those who wish to stay captive. Dan was situated in the land of the Philistines. Places with familiar names from the Bible we know, like Gath, Libnah, and Ramath. In the biblical account, Dan is one of the two children of Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid, one of Jacob's wives, the other child of Bilhah being Naphtali. It is understood they're not entirely of Israeli origin. According to the biblical narrative, the tribe had originally tried to settle in the central coastal area of Palestine, but due to the hostility with the Philistines, who had already settled, they were only able to camp in the hill country overlooking the Sorek Valley. The camp location was known as Mahana Dan, Camps of Dan. The region they were trying to settle included the area as far north as Joppa and south into Shephelah and the area of Timnah. It is said they abandoned hope and migrated north, and North Israel is presumed. After the conquest of the land by Joshua until the formation of the First Kingdom in 1050 BCE, the tribe of Dan was part of a loose confederation of Israelite tribes where no central government existed, and in times of crisis the people were led by ad hoc leaders known as the judges. With the growth and threat from Philistine incursions, the Israelite tribes decided to form a strong centralized monarchy. Section 7, Tuatha De Danann. They burned their ships and advanced unperceived by the Firbolg until they landed in Slieve Erenn, and they formed a fog for 3 days and 3 nights over the sun and moon, and demanded battle or kingship of the Firbolg. The Battle of Magturid was fought between them, and afterwards 100,000 of the Firbolg were slaughtered there. Thereafter Tuatha De Danann took the kingship of Ireland. It is they who brought with them the stone of Fáil, which was in Tamer, on Dictor Innis Fáil, at Canaid Casinit, which was in Tamer, Innis Fáil at Canaid Rang. There were 4 cities in which the Tuatha De Danann were acquiring knowledge, namely Phalius, from the Leah Fáil, which was in Tamer, and it would not utter a cry unless it was under a king. A sage was in Phalius named Morfessa, a master of great wisdom, who gave the Tuatha the stone of Fáil. Gorius had a spear that when used in battle, it would never go against him who had it in his hands. That's to me an ark equivalent. As long as the ark was in battle, it assured victory. Assurus was the sage of Gorius, and it is said he gave a spear to Lug. Findius. Euseus and Findius gave Nuadu the sword of Nuadu. No man could escape it by reason of its venom. Semius was the wise in Murius, and gave the cauldron of the Dagda. No company would go away unsatisfied. These are some of the mythic elements that comprise the stories of the Tuatha De Danann. In this wise they came, without vessels or barks, in dark clouds over the air, by the might of Druidry, and they landed on the mountain of Cunmain Rain in Connachta, that is, the mountains of the sons of Delgade in Cunmain Rain. The Firbolg were there, and they saw a great cloud of mist upon the mountain of Cunmain. It settled down on the mountain a day and a night. Such was the greatness of the mist that they feared greatly before it, and not a man dared go near the mountain. There's a similarity right there to the Exodus, the mountain of God. They approached it afterwards on the 2nd day and saw the troops on the mountain. After the cloud dispersed, their numbers were greater than was apparent. But another company says that the Tuatha De Danann came in a sea expedition into Ireland, that they burnt their ships thereafter, and that it was owing to the fog of smoke that rose from them as they were burning that. Others have said that they came in that fog. Not so, however, for these are the 2 reasons why they burnt their ships: that the Formorag should not find them to rob them, and that they themselves should not find them to flee from Ireland, even if the rout should fall upon them at the hands of the Firbolg. The 3rd reason was lest Lug should find them, to do battle against Nuadu, son of Ectek, king of Tuatha De Danann, so that of these reasons the learned sang. All this while the Assyrians were in the high kingship of the whole world during that time: Cambyses, Darius, Xerxes, Alexander, it says. It says that the Irish received the laws twice in their history, and I have noticed a confusion of times and personages here, like the giving of the laws in 597 BCE. Laws were already well established since 1755 BC, the Code of Hammurabi. The law of Moses was well established, But laws were something people understood from long before. So it was the giving of the laws, or perhaps the re-giving, as they had already received them before. There is written confusion of Scota I and Scota II, whether or not Lugh took kingship. And in this next part, where Goidel is the son-in-law of Pharaoh, that was 1450 BCE, and not 597 BCE, because it was either Jeremiah or Milaspain, which would be a good second Goidel, that traveled with her in the second story. This I find to be a mystery. Who she is, where she came from, and who her father was is very confused, although you get the idea. And in some instances, seems like scholars disputed it, or even tried to cover it up or change it, because it did not make sense to them, and likely it would confuse any translator. And she was not the daughter of a pharaoh in 597 BCE, but a daughter-in-law of a pharaoh. I will explain. It is Alexander who expelled the pharaoh from the kingship of Egypt. His, Pharaoh's, was the son-in-law, Galam, named Mil. He came from Egypt with his wife Scota, daughter of Nectanebus, to Spain, and contended for Spain by force. The pharaoh Nectanebus is the 45th king after Pharaoh Senchres, Cenchres, who was drowned in the Red Sea. 914 years was the length of their reign from the Pharaoh Senchres to Pharaoh Nectanebus. In the end of the reign of Alexander, the sons of Mil came into Ireland, the Milesians. Now a certain clue here. It could easily be looked over, but understanding the way that the 26th dynasty was arranged helped, and finding the correct timeline. It was not Galam. Also, that is a reference to 1st Scota 1450 BCE, who was the son-in-law of Pharaoh, but rather it was a certain Pharaoh who had a daughter-in-law, who is the Scota in the second story, dating to 570 BCE. Like it has been said, one just needs to know where to look. Percy Newberry. Remembering that nothing is perfect in dating, Amosis II of the 26th dynasty had a wife, or rather a former wife, named Lattice of Cyrene, and I believe that this is the identity of the second Scota. If one looks further, the family history is very similar. There are a few noticeable particular details, and some shared with Nitocris also. She was not a daughter of a pharaoh in 597, 550 BCE time, versus 1450 BCE as Hatshepsut, daughter of a pharaoh, but she was a princess. She was the daughter of a king of the Batiad dynasty, Batis III and Queen Pheretima, her parents, and the sister of Arsacilas III, and a daughter-in-law of Pharaoh Apries. The Batiads were descendants of emigrants of Thera. Her great-great-great-grandfather led an expedition into Libya and settled. I will expand further later, also with proof that I am correct. The Lebor Gabala Erenn is much more than I could have explained here. It is a study itself. The correlation of the cloud on the mountain, Lugh in the battle with his grandfather Balor, whom he shot with a projectile from a sling, equally as intriguing as the Bible. It's quite a story. And the history of the Batidae of Cyrenaica is a study as well. Amazing history and well kept, despite its disputes. Very detailed. And early origins of democracy itself in Libya and its royal family, conferring legitimacy on the populace. Nitocris-Nicaule, 2184 BCE. Josephus' Index of Antiquities of the Jews. Nicaule is on the same line as Nitocris, Nicaule or Nitocris, which we should also consider, why he put these two together. World History Encyclopedia online article by Joshua J. Mark, published 31 March 2017. Nitocris, 2184 BCE, 2181 BCE. Greek name Nitocris. The last monarch of the 6th dynasty of Egypt, which concluded the period of the Old Kingdom of 2613 to 2181 BCE. Nitocris is best known from the story told of her by Herodotus, 484 to 425 BCE, in his histories book 11.100, in which she murders the assassins of her brother at a banquet. For the past century, the historicity of Nitocris has been questioned by scholars, even though her name appears on the Turin's king list of Egyptian monarchs. She is also mentioned by Manetho, 3rd century BCE, in his list of 6 dynasty Egyptian monarchs, and by Eratosthenes of Cyrene, 276 to 194 BCE, in his Theban list of Egyptian monarchy. Flavius Josephus, 37-100 CE, references Herodotus' story in his Antiquities of the Jews, 862, calling her Nicaule, and does not question the authenticity of the tale. Eratosthenes' mention of Nitocris is known through the work of Apollodorus of Athens, 180 BCE, which is cited by Syncellus, 810 CE, in his selection of chronography. Still, because there is no physical evidence of this queen, no monuments, no tomb, nor any later reference to her, some scholars have claimed her name as simply a scribal error for that of the last king of the 6th dynasty, Nitocris-Nicaule. I believe it was a concurrent reign of both a brother and a sister. There is also a question of Amun-Ra, first pharaoh of the 8th dynasty, after Nitocris and Nitocris-Nicaule. The 7th dynasty is looked at as chaos because of the rapid succession of pharaohs, which does deserve an extra look. Archaeologist Percy E. Newberry also equated her with Amun-Ra, but this is believed to be incorrect. The pharaoh she should not be equated with is Amun-Ra of the 4th dynasty, the builder of the 3rd pyramid of Giza. Recently, however, an increasing number of Egyptologists and scholars have come to accept the Herodotus account may have some basis in fact, and Nitocris is increasingly being recognized as the first queen regent of Egypt and the last monarch of the Old Kingdom. Amun-Ra, the first pharaoh of the 8th dynasty, first intermediate period. The underlying reason for the new evaluation of Nitocris is unclear, but may have to do with the kind of evidence first presented by the Egyptologist Percy E. Newberry, 1869-1949, who argued that Nitocris was an actual Egyptian ruler and not just a character and a fable repeated by Herodotus, and that her historicity should be accepted. Herodotus' account of Nitocris is often cited as the only evidence of the queen in history, while it is in actuality the only source of the story of the revenge. There are, as noted, other sources. Herodotus writes, after him came 330 kings, whose names the priests recited from a papyrus roll. In all these many generations, there was 18 Ethiopian kings and 1 queen, native to the country. The rest were all Egyptian men. Compare the 25th to 26th dynasty. They were all Nubian or Ethiopian men. At the end of the 26th dynasty was Amosis II and Lattice of Cyrenaica. Lattice's brother was assassinated in a marketplace, 580 BCE. The name of the queen was the same and equated to that of the Babylonian princess Nitocris. She avenged her brother. He was king of Egypt concurrent and was slain by his subjects, who then gave Nitocris the sovereignty, 2100 BCE. She put many of the conspiring Egyptians to death by treachery. She built a spacious underground chamber, then with the pretense of inaugurating it, but with quite another intent in her mind, she gave a feast, inviting to it those Egyptians whom she knew to have had most complicity in her brother's murder. While they feasted, she let the river in upon them by a vast secret channel. This was all that the priest told of her, except that when she had done this, she cast herself into a chamber full of hot ashes to escape vengeance. See corresponding history online, Arsacilas III of Cyrene, Lattice's brother story, a link between 2000 BCE and 583 BCE. It's very strange. Nitocris and Lattice. Thankfully, that's not the only clue, because that's horrible. Histories 11-100. Scholars became suspect of this account when no Egyptian sources were found to corroborate it, and even more so when it was considered that Herodotus reported a similar event only a few chapters later, involving different characters. Sesostris has also been cited by a number of ancient historians as the first to conquer the known world, or to have conquered Egypt, and so is regarded as a mythical figure, an amalgam of different Egyptian kings, not historical. Manetho simply lists Nitocris' name and credits her as braver than any man of her time and of exceptional beauty. Waddell 54. He also, however, credits her with the building of the 3rd pyramid, which has been rejected completely by Egyptologists because it's well established that the third pyramid was built by Menkaura. Note similar spelling, but not to be confused with Menkaura. Menkaura, 2532, 2503 BCE. Percy E. Newberry argued that physical evidence for Nitocris in Egypt was available, if one knew what one was looking for. The pharaohs of the 8th dynasty ruled from Memphis. See the pyramids of Saqqara. Eratosthenes lists her as ruling for 6 years from Thebes and notes she was the 22nd ruler since Menes, a queen, not a king. Her name means Athena the Victorious, but gives no further details. Nicaule means victory of the people. Compare Athena Nike. Josephus mentions her as Nicaule, cites Herodotus, but does not elaborate on the revenge story. Apollodorus of Athens preserved Eratosthenes' table of Egyptian kings, and Syncellus later cited it also, without any corroboration of Herodotus' account, is how Nitocris came to be regarded as mythical. However, Percy E. Newberry, in 1943, argued these other sources should be taken more seriously in establishing the historicity of Nitocris. Newberry's argument. Percy E. Newberry is nowhere near as well known as he should be. It was Newberry who first brought Howard Carter to Egypt in 1891 and set Carter on the path toward discovering the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922. Newberry, in fact, would work with Carter on the excavation and evaluation of the contents, being especially knowledgeable in botany and able to identify certain organic elements in the tomb. In the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology, Volume 29, Newberry presented his case in the article Queen Nitocris of the 6th Dynasty, in which he states how he finds it remarkable that his colleagues should consider this woman as either a king or a mythical character, when a preponderance of evidence exists to establish her authenticity as the first fully attested queen of Egypt, 51-52. Nitocris, according to Newberry, is not only listed in the Turin Kings list, but also the Abydos Kings list, and further, her tomb can be identified in Saqqara. He interprets Nitocris' name as Neith is excellent, and demonstrates how the name Neith appears in the tomb of one of Pepi II's queens. He then makes an interesting observation concerning Manetho's repudiated claim that Nitocris built the third pyramid. Newberry points out that the great Egyptologist Flinders Petrie noted some years earlier how Manetho simply says she built the third pyramid, and that scholars since have assumed he meant the third pyramid at Giza. But this may not be his meaning at all. It is possible, since Manetho gives no location for the third pyramid, that he was referring to the third pyramid at Saqqara, not at Giza. Newberry then points out that the third pyramid at Saqqara is that of Neith, 53. The prenomen given name of the woman in the tomb of Neith at Saqqara may have been Menkaura, which could easily be confused with Menkaura, 54. One could argue that her brother was Nitocris-Sipta, also given as Nechakarra-Sipta, usually listed as that last king of the 6th dynasty who did have a short reign. The king's time on the throne, however, corresponds exactly to Nitocris' own, which is why Egyptologists came to believe her name was a scribal error or a mistake for his. It's very hard for people to envision two rulers at once, despite well-known co-regencies and family members of the same age group. At least 3 at a time could rule realistically in Egypt, whether it was great-grands to grandsons or daughters or brothers and sisters, which could also explain possible rampant misidentification of brothers and sisters as married, but as having been united under Amun as rulers together. Family is important. Not everybody has to die in power struggles with family or be incestuous or steal the throne, if they were a woman. Merenre II, Nitocris-Sipta, Nitocris, Menkaura. Egyptologist Barbara Watterson writes, the first queen regent of Egypt was Nitocris, 2180 BCE, of whom nothing much is known except that she came to the throne at a time of political instability on the death of an aged king, Pepi II, who had reigned for 90 years. Manetho asserted that she was the noblest and loveliest of the women of her time and of fair complexion. Newbury claims regarding the pyramid tomb at Saqqara are questionable. His argument that Nitocris should be accepted because she is included on 2 kings' lists, as well as accepted without question by the scholar Eratosthenes, holds more weight. There are many rulers, as Malloch notes, who are little more than names from around the same period, and whose historicity goes unquestioned. The queen from Herodotus' account is now recognized as an actual historical figure, even though scholars are still working with the same info they had 100 years ago. The cylinder seal. Another possible, though not contemporaneous, attestation of Menkaure is a cylinder seal made of glazed steatite, now in the British Museum under the catalogue number 30557, and inscribed with the text, "The good God, Lord of the 2 lands, Menkaure." The seal dates to the 26th dynasty. Despite the object's date, the attribution of the seal to Menkaure is said to be unlikely, given that Menkaure is a rather obscure king. Some scholars have suggested instead the seal bears a mistake and is actually referring to the better-known pharaoh Menkaure. Harry Reginald Hall, Catalogue of Egyptian Scarabs, etc., in the British Museum, Volume 1. Royal Scarabs, 1913, page 272, seal number 2650. The history of the Batidae, the Batiad dynasty of Cyrene, is as impressive, like the Lebor Gabala Erenn. I wish I could have expanded more here. It was excellently written, and itself is worthy of being known. From Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed. The seething pot of Jeremiah, 113, and similar allegorical objects shown to represent certain ideas. The prophets, however, are also shown things which do not illustrate the object of the vision, but indicate it by their name, through its etymology or homonymity. Thus the imaginative faculty forms the image of a thing, the name of which has 2 meanings, one of which denotes something different from the image. This is likewise a kind of allegory. Compare Makal Shaked, Makkalshaked, almond staff of Jeremiah 1, 11, 12. It was intended to indicate by the second meaning of Shaked, the prophecy, for I will watch, Shaked, etc., which has no relation whatsoever to the staff or to the almonds. The same is the case with the Kuleb Kays, a basket of summer fruit, seen by Ahmose, by which the completion of a certain period was indicated, the end, Hyksos, having come. Amos 8:2. Still more strange is the following manner of calling the prophet's attention to a certain object. Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed. Strong's Concordance, 4731, Makkel or Makella, Maqquel, or Makella, Maqquelah, a rod, a staff, origin uncertain. 1. A branch of a tree, symbolic rod, almond rod of Jeremiah. Symbolic rods or staves with names, used by prophet Zechariah 11:7, 10:14. Figurative of Moab, Jeremiah 48:17. 2. A staff, used in journeying, Genesis 32:11, Exodus 12:11, carried even when riding, Numbers 22:27. 3. A wand of a diviner, Hosea 4:12. Almond tree, Shaked, Shoqed, March 11th, 2016. Author, Superadmin 777, from iamjohanna.wordpress.com. Musings from the Heart. The word of the Lord came to me. What do you see, Jeremiah? I see the branch of an almond tree, I replied. The Lord said to me, you have seen correctly, for I am watching to see that my word is fulfilled. Jeremiah 1:11-12. In Israel, the almond tree is the first to bloom or awaken. Interestingly, the Hebrew word for almond tree and watch are almost the same word. Shaked, Hebrew word H8245 Strong's Concordance, to awake, watch, wake, and be alert, and to keep watch of, to be watchful over. Shaked, Shaqed, H8247, almond tree, almonds. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Jeremiah, what do you see? And I said, I see a branch of an almond tree. Then the Lord said to me, you have seen well, for I am ready to perform my word. In the first chapter of Jeremiah, Jeremiah tells us about a vision in which he sees a branch of an almond tree. In Hebrew, the word is not just a branch, anaf, as translated here, but a dry branch, makel, M-A-K-E-L. The almond tree, during fall, has no leaves. In this season, it is difficult to distinguish between a dry branch of an almond tree and a dry branch of another tree. Jeremiah can make this distinction, and therefore the Lord compliments him and says, "You have seen well." And the Lord continues, "For I am ready to perform my word." If you read it in Hebrew, there is a special meaning, ready to perform my word, or in better translation, be diligent to perform my word. Be diligent is shaked. Almond in Hebrew is shaked. So the vision of the almond tells Jeremiah that the Lord is being diligent to perform his word. There are other verses in which the Lord uses the word shaked with the same meaning. For example, "And it shall come to pass that as I have watched over them to pluck up, to break down, to throw down, to destroy, and to afflict, so I will watch over them to build and to plant, says the Lord." Jeremiah 31:28. Here again, the expression watch over that is used twice is derived from the word shaked in Hebrew. A common explanation for the connection between almond and being diligent is the special way in which the almond trees blossom. During February, when most trees in the mountains of Israel are without leaves, the almond tree blossoms with beautiful white flowers. This is the first sign for the coming of spring. The magnificent blossom in the middle of the winter might have brought our father to call the tree shaked for its hard and diligent work. The Black Book of Paisley and the Metrical Prophecy. Delving into the history of the Scota-Chronicon, in which the Lebor Gabala Erenn is a part, the Black Book of Paisley is a 15th century earliest transcription of the manuscript, the Scota-Chronicon, housed in the British Library. The first part of the Scottish Chronicle is written by John Fordoun, an Aberdeen priest, before 1360-1384, 14th century. Walter Bauer continued Fordoun's work. He was an abbot of the monastery of Incombe in 15th century. This copy of the text is known as the Black Book of Paisley because it was written at Paisley west of Glasgow, a place honored by the Stuart royal lineage. It's not the original work, but it's the earliest transcription made of the writings of Fordoun and Bauer. Many of Scotland's chronicles were destroyed by English invasions. To rebuild the history that was so vandalized that affected Fordoun greatly, he visited monasteries throughout Great Britain and Ireland, chronicling the Scottish history and royalty until David I, 1153 CE. In 1441, Walter Bauer was urged by Sir David Stewart to transcribe Fordoun's 5 books of Scottish history and add 11 more, totaling 16. It is a copy of the original work. Bauer completed his work in 1447, continuing the Royal Scottish House till James II. The metrical prophecy is at the top of the recto of this folio on the right-hand side of the inscription, quoted at the beginning of the preceding chapter. Beneath the words Quinques Libros, there is an erasure. Right-hand side lower down in the same handwriting is the date 1650. On the left-hand side of the page, opposite of the inscription already mentioned, is the following in the same hand. And you'll have to excuse my translation. Ex Scota nata Pharaonis regis Egypti, Sibylla, ud veteres tradunt Scotae nomen habet, post Bretones, Noricos, Pictos, Dacos, Romanos, nobiliter Scoti jus tenorum sum. These lines are a quotation from the metrical prophecy, which comes from memory inaccurately, or if copied, it was from a text differing from that which we now have. Immediately after the table, at the foot of the same column, in the same handwriting, are the verses Hic Hoppus, star, Hoc finit et scriberis desinit octor, quod Scota-Chronicon jur vocare sole, continet iste liber actus, gestus venerandos, regium pontificum sic procerum populi, Quinque libros Fordoun, undenos octor erabat. Bauer for marginal note. Sic tibi clarisit sunt sidissim numero, ergo pro precibus petimus te lector eorum, ut sint Reg-Nicaule scriptor uterque poli. These lines are also present in the sheaves 1484 CE, Brecon Castle, and Edinburgh MSS 1510 CE. But at the end of Book 16, just before the tabula, or Index Alphabeticas in the Black Book, the H of Hopus is written on erasure, and the name Bauer on the margin is in the hand of 1650. So it wasn't Hic Hopus, it was Hic Opus. Translated as best I could. She was born of the Scots of the Pharaoh king of Egypt. According to the old Scottish tradition, it has a Scottish name. After the Britons, the Norse, the Picts, and the Roman Dacians, nobly it is the right of the Scots to hold his own. Here this work ends. The author stops writing what is called the Scotichronicon. This book contains acts, gestures to be venerated, kings, pontiffs. Thus I cast out the nobles. Author of the 5 books, Fordun, plus 11 works. So it is clear to you that there are 16 in number. Therefore we ask you, the reader, for prayers, that both writers of the royal line preserved it for the world, and every citizen, in every city, being citizens of the world. That Scotland was very poor in these chronicles and other historical documents is in striking contrast to the wealth of England in such monuments, and it has been a subject of national reproach from an early time. It is urged that this misfortune arose not from ignorance or neglect on the parts of their ancestors, or for the lack of material or want of competent writers, but from the vandalism of Edward I, who it is said destroyed and carried off as much as possible of Scotland's ancient annals. The loss which Fordun himself believed his country sustained caused him such grief that he was determined to repair it so far as was in him, and that was very brave. Josephus was also very similar. He states that he saw other people writing history falsely, and he was inspired to write it as clearly and factually as possible. In the Black Book of Paisley, among other things, includes one of the earliest reproductions of the Declaration of Arbroath, Scottish Declaration of Independence. Early kings, early Scottish historians, religious leaders, military and government leaders. It even includes an alphabet with numerical equivalents. Possessed by Charles II, 1660 to 1685 CE, the manuscript in his vast collection was given to the British Museum by King George II, 1759. Now presently in the British Museum, the most controversial aspect of it is the lineage of the royal house and the peculiar fact that the line of descent from Scota repeats, although not exactly the same the second time. The very existence of the book itself came under intense scrutiny. Immortality is controversial. See the first book of Genesis. Nuach, Irish, means new. Nuachongabala, new settlement. Hebrew, Strong's Concordance, H5117, to rest, to settle. Compare the word Shekinah, Hebrew, to rest, to settle. Charles O'Connor of Ballingaris notes 1826 CE on the Annals of the Kingdom of Ireland by the Four Masters, page 227, Olam Fadla, Irish, means eminent in learning, wisdom, sage, lawgiver, gave law similar to Moses. Old Gaelic, Olam, highest learning. Professor Ellis, page 4. Olam, Celtic, revealer. Olam, Hebrew, ancient, secret. Strong's 5769, possessor of secret knowledge. Fadla, or Fola, wonderful.